the culture we live in, the society we live in, says, okay, you are conditioned, it's profit or gain, profit or loss, pursuit of pleasure, and there's only modifications of that, getting more pleasure, getting more money, getting more profit. Now we're trying to challenge that completely. I mean, we're trying to bring in a question which is not a question out of profit. So I put together some slides with a quote of Krishnamurti for us to go over and to look at, and I'll introduce them. So the title, of course, The Ending of Psychological Time. So to start, this is a very small, because some of you don't know anything about, or don't know much about Krishnamurti. 1895 he was born, 1986 he died. So just to summarize, his message was understanding oneself, transformation, and changing human consciousness. He said it's not about trying to change one human being or that the schools are, he said it's really about changing human consciousness. So the challenge was enormous. He didn't say, hey, we want to change the consciousness of one human being. No, it has to be you create something that is supposed to change all of human consciousness. So, and that's also how am I seeing that. Also, what we're doing here is that these explorations are becoming part also of human consciousness. So, if we probe and shift and see something, then it's seen for everybody. A very well-known phrase of Krishnamurti is, "You are the world, and the world is you," and that we are all very interconnected. That it's not like the individualism is a very superficial layer, although very dominant in us. And I did connection to nature because, for me, that reflects the best of what we're trying to do here. We're trying to explore something which is not part of, like what we heard yesterday, of part of our thought. Nature is not part of thought. Now, what we're looking at in ourselves, that's what we're trying to look at in ourselves, is also not part of thought. We're trying to look at what is beyond thought. So any description is meaningless. But if I tell you just a small phrase like, can you imagine a beautiful sunny day and you're sitting in the shade, and you immediately get the sense of it, right? Immediately connects you to that whole sense of being under a tree in the summer, and the shade coming through the tree, and the leaves of the trees, and all of that. Now, in my understanding, that's also the same way I think I propose we look at the discussions here. It's not about the words, the tree is important, but that it somehow refers to something that we already directly connecting to. It's not something new, a new thought that has to be constructed. And that it is, and Krishnamurti was so adamant how important the relationship with nature was, that sense of presence, that sense of being part of that. If you have no relationship with nature, you have no relationship with man. So it is so radically, unambiguously, he states.
And he defines nature there.
Yeah, meadows, groves, rivers, yeah. And if you have no relationship with that, we shall have no relationship with each other. So, obviously, we cannot create that relationship by looking at something by thought or conclusion. So what I see also the perspective is like, it's the challenge for humanity, the challenge for our human race, the challenge for us as a group of people sitting there representing all that. And the fact is that we are conditioned, we are shaped, we have all our youth, we brought up and we are formed, shaped, we have our personal traumas, our personal limitations, our burdens, the things that are preconceived ideas, our value system.
Once you're made aware that you are conditioned,
yeah,
then something comes from that.
Yeah.
You say it's not possible, then you say, well, it's impossible, it's the way I am.
Yeah, no, but my guess is the culture we live in, the society we live in, says, okay, you are conditioned, it's profit or gain, profit or loss, pursuit of pleasure, and there's only modifications of that, getting more pleasure, getting more money, getting more profit. Now, we're trying to challenge that completely. I mean, we're trying to bring in a question which is not a question out of profit, as Shalimar was saying just before. Although, I mean, and that's also a little bit we have to be careful, because when people, I myself maybe included, when you start reading Krishnamurti, he talks about freedom, and it's a very attractive idea. You know, I want to have that. It's a big carrot that's been held in front of you. So I think everybody who starts reading Krishnamurti will see the carrot and will go after the carrot, and at a certain point realizing that there's not much to go by, right? Because he hardly gives you anything. So there's an element of trying to achieve also within, you can have that also within Krishnamurti's work, that you're trying to want to be free, or I want to have a quiet mind, or I want to, the same movement that we have in our day-to-day life, we can just progress or just continue in looking at Krishnamurti. So I think that's an important warning, because the brain that is wanting to be safe and wanting to experience and wanting to have pleasure will try to incorporate everything it meets into that structure.
I think Krishnamurti said, I think I'm quoting correctly, the desire for enlightenment is the desire for permanent pleasure.
Yeah, yes. So that's a big carrot, right? Permanent pleasure. Yeah?
That's part of the conditioning, isn't it?
Yeah. The other challenge that's been put down by Krishnamurti says it's the responsibility of each human being to bring about his transformation, to look at this. And that's not a collective movement. It's really each of us who has to face who one is in order to...
But we escape it and looking for the teacher, following the teacher.
Yeah, if that happens, then you're enslaved again, you're conditioned again.
That's also something very important in the work that I do, counselling, when you're working with clients, is that you're not trying to tell them what to do, right? You're listening, you're reflecting back what they're telling you, to maybe give them some further clarity, but it's very important not to tell them what to do.
But why? Why is that?
Well, because it's really because of this. I think it's then they're just following a list of instructions, and they haven't really learned from it, right? If they come and they just leave with a list, that's quite different from leaving with some understanding about yourself.
Yeah.
That actually you've given them something back about themselves that they didn't know before, through what I've told you.
Yeah.
And then they can just see that.
But what creates change and what's so important? He said, nurture doubt and discontent. He said, it's so important with young people, also in the educational discussions. Young people doubt, they are discontented, and that needs to be fed, that needs to be supported, and not the cultural movement of society to say, well, you're discontent because you don't understand, or you're discontented because, and you'll get over it when you get older. And that's counterculture, right? Our culture says, if it has discontent, solve it. Put something in place. So it's you start to turn it around. That's what is most uncomfortable. You put almost as, that's the most important thing. Discontent, doubt. And the other thing is, and it's several, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's coming out of Krishnamurti's work, that it's important to nurture fundamental questions, important questions. The question, who am I? The whole sense of who I am. What is loneliness? And loneliness we will go into later on also. It's a very important aspect. Is there a thinker inside me? The whole idea that I am thinking. And of course the big question, which is of course also coming out of Buddhism, what is suffering? What is human suffering? And I think that's where almost everything starts. So, suffering. And I think our whole questioning, all of our reading Krishnamurti, maybe even being here, I mean, it starts by human suffering and the fact that we are suffering. But now there's something weird. I mean, I wouldn't ask it here, but in generally when I ask now who is suffering, we mostly say, well, you know, the other person who had an accident or lost somebody or lost a lot of cash. You know, it's projected outwardly. It's not as suffering as part of our day-to-day existence of the ongoing process of having expectations or having images and being in conflict. You know, it's very difficult. As an idea, it's good to say, well, all human beings are suffering, but to put the focus on, but am I suffering? To see the suffering within our daily life is very difficult because we escape it so quickly. And
well, we don't see that.
And we don't see
that our whole life is spent in escaping the suffering.
So who is suffering anyway? Who's suffering here? You know, I mean, it's like it's an amazing question, right? Who is suffering? And
who's not suffering?
And who's not suffering? Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's a who.
No.
I think the first question is, what is suffering?
Yeah.
Do you got that in there?
Well, we don't face our own suffering.
Well, I mean, that's.
I mean, I meant that too. We mostly don't face our own suffering. Yeah. Now this is a quote. I would quote from Krishna. He said, "And because we're suffering, we are pursuing happiness." Yeah. And
you go to the other end, so the opposite. We create happiness out of the escape from suffering.
Yeah.
We don't know what happiness is.
I think happiness is uncaused, and it's you come upon it. It's not a mental construct at all.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. And how do you then relate like happiness or joy? Is that similar or?
Yeah.
I think the joy of losing yourself in nature, for instance, what you were saying earlier, that there is no me here. There's just somehow I'm having this experience with this flower or something.
Yeah.
And that is, for me, joy.
Yeah.
Feeling a part of it.
Being part of it. Connected.
Relationship.
Most people say, well, I'm suffering when I lost my partner. I had this wonderful relationship. I was so happy, and I lost it. The person left me, or I left the person. So loneliness related to other people. Now, Krishnamurti said, well, there's loneliness because you're isolated within thought. Because you're thinking isolates. Like when you're in nature, you're connected. But when you start thinking in nature, you isolate yourself again from that presence. So that the very nature of thought, the very nature of thinking and being caught up in one's thinking isolates. And that is the root cause of isolation. So isolation is loneliness. And then he says, okay, so that is one mechanism. Because you are lost absorbed in your thought, you isolate. The isolation causes loneliness. And then he said, but then the loneliness is so unbearable, you want to get away from it. And the trying to get away from it is conflict. And that is the whole sequence of human suffering. Conflict comes, and he says conflict comes through consolation, explanations, etc. Trying to escape from the very fact that we're isolated.
So isolation and consolation, how are they related?
Yeah. Well, you want to give it a try?
Well, so isolate, you mean you're set apart, you're isolated.
Yeah.
Consolation is, like the prefix says, you're with it.
Yeah.
So you want to get with it, but you can't get with it if you're running away from it.
Yeah.
If you're running.
When you're grieving, right? Somebody in your family passed away, and somebody comes and says, well, that was a good man. It's trying to console you. I mean, it doesn't help me with my grieving, but
Right.
I mean, with everybody. I'm not condemning any of that, right? Because I'm happy if somebody says something to me when it happened. That happened. But it's still, that's consoling. It doesn't really address the issue.
Yeah.
But it's tries to pacify it,
Right.
trying to, hey, get the sting out of it. Hey, you're in pain, let's get it.
I wonder if suffering comes when you give consolation, when you seek explanations, etc.
When you give consolation, is that what you're saying? Or when
It
you
says
get,
conflict
says
comes
seeking.
when you seek
Yeah,
consolation
yeah.
and explanations. Does conflict come when you give consolation, when you give explanation?
Yeah.
there's also a direct quote of Krishnamurti, and he says, well, to end sorrow is to face the fact of one's loneliness. To face the fact, and in this whole sequence you can see to face the fact of one's isolation, which comes about through being caught up in one's thinking.
I was thinking when you talking, just going back to consolation and explanations, going back to the video yesterday about this is the excuse in a way, right? You talk this psychological time, but we say explanations, some explaining and putting it off. So you're moving into the psychological time.
Yes,
We talked about that yesterday.
Yes,
Yeah.
About religion also,
yes,
right?
yes,
About
yes, yes,
this need for explaining something,
yes,
which actually comes through, is showing through this also.
yeah, yes, yes. So the very fact is that we all, most of the time, or often, absorbed in our thinking, in our,
Right.
in our thought,
Yeah.
isolated,
And isolating it, yeah,
preoccupied with ourselves,
yeah,
Thought isolated.
and that's the cause.
yeah. And getting away from the
Yeah.
actual, yeah,
So, and that isolation is disconnecting. When you're in isolation, when you're in thought, you're disconnected from the presence in nature. And that's the simplest way to look at it. But also of relationship.
How do you face a fact?
How do you face it? Yeah. Good. So, just put this down here, just to keep them really separate.
Good.
Like when we talk about time, the clock,
Good.
the watch, etc., we're not talking about that, right? Inevitably, there is the Earth evolves around the Sun, and our Milky Way is expanding in the universe, and that's all somehow related to the pendulum, the swing of the pendulum. That's psychological time. So you see the future as the next exit, the next exit to go. Future, present, and past. I mean, that seems to be how we are in our brain, right? Or in our psyche. We're chewing over our past, which is happening in the present, the chewing over, and in that representing the future, how it's going to be. What are we going to have for lunch? Or something like that. We're zooming in on the fact human suffering is the starting point, right? Human suffering. Loneliness, which comes part through isolation, which happens through thought. Now this is what our thought is made of. The chewing over, the being preoccupied with, oh my God, what happens in my past? And you do that in the present, and you do that to change the future. The brain is all the time occupied with some safety. It's a great, fantastic machine to create safety. Right? In the other realm, it's isolating. Instead of relating to nature, you're preoccupied with that's an oak, that's a this, that's a that, which loses your presence. And that's the same in relationship. You know, we're sitting here now. I mean, it's about 16, 17 people here. Most of us didn't know each other. Within 10 seconds, you have an idea of who one is. That's that kind of person, that's that kind of person, that's that kind of person. And that's how we relate to each other now.
But that's how you isolate.
That's the isolating movement. In order for our brain to be safe, we have learned this way of relating through creating an idea of what somebody can be. Well, in that 10 seconds, which happens in that present, your whole past of how you have been categorizing people has been brought to the present, and that's how you're going to meet, how you're going to meet me in the future, and how am I going to meet you in the future. I already have an idea. So, I mean, this is just to put it in his words, so the thought of the future is conditioned by the present, which is again conditioned by the past. That's what we just said.
Well, there's two thoughts then in there, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Thought of the future is one.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thought coming from the past. So you got a thought coming from the past and thought projecting into the future.
Mm-hmm. For the sake of the future, we sacrifice ourselves now. But in order to, I don't care so much because about what happens to me now, to be related now, but I'm preparing to be related with you later on. So the psychological time is the time that the mind has invented.
That's important.
Meaning, so that future and that past, the future we have invented. Time is the goal, is between the goal and the present state. So I am here, I already have an idea in my mind where I want to be, and there's a space in between, and that space in between is psychological time. I am this, and I want to be that. I am rich and I want to be poor, or the other way around. And that's a very important feature of the brain. For our brains to be safe, in order to do that, it's constantly comparing pictures. It's comparing pictures of the past with the present. So that constantly there's a process of comparing happening, and that is what creates a psychological time. The process of comparing.
Competition is comparison.
Yeah, as soon as you,
So now you've got one image competing with the other image, and that's where the conflict.
But that's if you want to change something about, when you compare and then you're trying to change something.
But all comparison, there'll always be a conflict. This or that, the choosing, the putting together.
This part, no, that part.
So when there is no comparison, I'm just taking my thought on that. When there is no comparison, then psychological time doesn't exist.
Psychological time, so we're just zooming out and elaborating a little bit the distance between what is and what should be, constantly being preoccupied with that. And the conflict, the competition, the contradiction, the battle between what is and becoming what should be. That's the other. And you can, and of course this requires, and that's why we also get back to meditation at a certain point, this requires that one starts to look at one's own thought to see if this is true. I mean, we shouldn't accept that this is true, right? I mean, we have to experiment with that and look at that and see if this is so or not. So I am angry, I am in conflict, I am violent, and I want to be, well, doesn't it look good?
So between the two pictures is the word how.
Maybe,
How do I go from that to that?
If you're comparing and you have this image as the one you want to pursue, then you will put the question how.
But I think when you ask, did he not say at one point, when you ask how, you're not listening? Right? Anytime you ask how, you're not, I like that in a way, you're not listening.
The issue with the question how is an ongoing, in all Krishnamurti's work, how dangerous it is to use the word how. Because the how means that you have some kind of system, or you're going to ask somebody to tell you what to do. That means you create dependency. And when there's dependency, you're not looking anymore. You cannot be in a dependent relationship. You won't see nature. I mean, that's obvious.
Well, you won't see yourself.
And you won't see yourself.
And that intelligence, which...
We're in a constant movement of becoming something other than what we are. Because we all have this idea where we want to be, and that's where we want to achieve that.
But then you have two things in conflict. You have what you think you are, and what you'd like to be. So both of those.
Yes, that's good to point that out. That there's already some kind of judgment about what you are, which is compared with
what you want to be.
What you want to be. Yes.
Judgment.
So it's
both
actually
of those.
So the conflict is between two ideas.
That's
two
correct.
images. So that's an important aspect. So I will be just to emphasize this. I will be something tomorrow which I'm not today. So to reiterate, this process of becoming is human suffering. The distance, the time, becoming is human suffering.
Right, this constant movement towards something that I think I should be is suffering.
But towards something and away from the truth.
Well, away from what you are right now, right?
I think what is important here is that automatically what our brains will do, they will say there's an object of suffering. The suffering is in I don't have money.
Right.
It doesn't see that the conflict is created in the comparison.
Yeah.
So I feel afraid and I don't like the feeling of being afraid. So I am afraid and I have an idea of not being afraid. And I try to get rid of the feeling of being afraid, so that as time is born, I want to
I mean,
be
it
something
takes
else.
time to get rid of.
Yeah, that time is born already by the intent of wanting to move away.
The riddance.
Yeah.
The riddance.
So to understand fear, we must understand time. We must understand that by thinking about wanting to move away, we create time. Now, is it possible to look at fear? I think that's the question that Krishnamurti puts now. Is it possible to stay with it instead of moving away from it? So, and then, and this is direct quote again, that knowledge in itself, as time, gives a sense of security. The knowledge that you can move away into a state where there's no fear, that knowledge creates security. If I have an idea, I am uncomfortable now, but happy, I will be better off somewhere else. In that idea, I create security. So by postponing, creating this image of being safe, you create some security. So that's a deep-rooted mechanism within our brain. And what we really do is to stay with our fears. That is where the whole challenge is, and that's where that's the essence of what the whole thing we talk about. The ending of psychological time is are we able? Is that at all an option within our human brain to stay with fear, or are we enslaved mechanically, or even are we in a closed system where we inevitably have to create that other picture and to the picture of without fear and moving towards that. So if we did, we might find that sometimes a snake is just a rope, meaning what we see as fear might be just an idea we have in our head. So the second example is violence. Violence, anger, aggression. The fact is that we all have anger at times, and we're all aggressive at times, and we're all assertive at times, and this is what is the fact of who we are as human beings. But then we project an ideal, a movement, a picture of non-violence. And then I want to follow that. I say, well, I am angry, but I'm going to create an image of me being non-angry, and then I'm going to use these words. I'm going to be very clever in that, and that ideal I'm going to follow. So, and Krishna would say, okay, that's time again. You move away from what is the fact that you're violent, that you are aggressive, and you want to be non-violent is an ideal that you put up. So Krishnamurti says here, if you have an ideal, however noble, however beautiful and romantic, however nonsensical even, you need time to arrive at that idealistic state. And to arrive at that, you destroy the present. So the challenge is it possible to face what is, which is violence, or in the previous example, fear? So we think we need time to be perfect, to get over something, to be free of our anxieties, to be free of our sorrow, to be free of our fears. The dangers of psychological time. In time, there's a great deal of conflict, pain, suffering and brutality in creating this idea. Psychological time is a danger because it prevents you from acting. And time is a deceiver, because by creating the ideal image, it doesn't do a thing to bring about a change, because you're not facing actually what you are. You're not facing the fact of I have this idea, and in comparing this idea, I'm unhappy. So time is poison, time is danger, of which you have to be tremendously aware, as living with a tiger. So that's how he puts it. So Krishnamurti is quite radical there, already where they looked at that. So no methods, and can we be free of psychological time? Because he said every method implies time. We discussed that. If you sit in front of a wall with the expectation of something to happen, you have this image in front of you. The most important aspect is just our state of mind. Like Krishnamurti was doing yoga every day. I mean, he would be very much strongly advocating against becoming enlightened through yoga. You know, he would say things like, in extreme case, he would say, yoga is like combing your hair. You know, something like that. He says, don't make it into something else. So, and also, so then we have to be a little bit careful. His focus, I mean, my understanding, his focus is on the state of mind. It's not actually what you're doing. You know? There is really a problem with expectations, because you lock yourself in, which is the creation of more conflict. So you better be aware of that. If you follow, you become dependent, and if there's dependency, there's conflict. So, and what we just also came up on was that whole observation and looking, and Krishnamurti uses that phrase choiceless awareness, right? Is that possible? Is it possible to be aware? Is there an action where time is not involved at all? Is it possible to be aware, to look, and there's no movement of expectations, no new image that you're going to pursue? Or, if that is happening, can that be seen also? So in attention, he says there's no center. When there's no me attending. It's not you looking, oh, this is a right thought, this is a wrong thought. Then you know you're in that whole game of thoughts. So in attention, there's no center. There's no you deciding what are the right thoughts and what are the wrong thoughts.
Is this the observer and the observed?
Yeah.
That same thing?
Yeah.
The observer is the observed.
So, and that's also an interesting an emphasis. It's empty, and he says, well, it is not an action of will. You cannot choose to do so. You cannot say, well, I read this book, and I like that book. I think it's a good book. I'm going to do that, and now I have now made a decision to do it, and I'm going to implement it. It's will effort is completely irrelevant in all this, because will is always too late. It's already happening, and then I say, I don't want this. So, and that is also a little, that's actually the whole time when you read Krishnamurti, it's very disconcerting, because there's nothing you can do. I mean, that's why the subtitle was. There was a subtitle also. What was the subtitle? The importance of doing nothing. The importance of doing nothing. There's nothing you can do. It is, there's somehow that we have this ability to see, and this ability of see will act. So not through choice. So the ending of time, so meditation. So here we bring in meditation. Ending of time, thought and sorrow. So and this is what we came upon yesterday also in the video. He said, okay, meditation is not, okay, this is meditation and you're going to apply it. He said meditation is already the starting point, the inquiry into what is sacred. To find out, to feel that, to have that quality of mind that is really sacred, timeless. So he said the inquiry into that is already part of meditation.
So it's not thinking. How does it relate to thinking?
Yeah.
That's the question. Is meditation thinking?
Is inquiry thinking?
And apparently it's not quite the same. Thinking is making up things, thinking, and the meditation is not thinking. Not making up things, but facing. This is the facing the fact. That's how I see it.
Isn't that where belief comes into it? I mean, you have religion, or belief in anything. It goes back again, belief in self-identity. Myself, my name is ... my zip code is ... So we get locked in belief.
Yes.
Which really, what he said, the key is sacredness,
Mm.
but we've misrepresented sacredness with religion.
Yes, yes, yes.
We run to something that we can touch. I mean, our logical mind is saying, yes, okay, the tree, that's religious, then there's a God somewhere behind it, because it gets cold or the tree falls off or something. So again, fear steps in.
Yes, yes,
So fear is the food of belief.
yes.
And meditation and sacredness is the key out of that fear.
Yes. The challenge is somehow how to approach meditation without a preconceived idea, but as a process of learning, right? A process of inquiry, which is. So the question that's been put, and God knows how we have to answer, how it can be answered. Can the mind, your mind, be absolutely quiet without control? And any control is again conflict, without movement of thought. So that's the challenge people to us. Yeah. The other thing Krishnamurti says about the ending of thought is the ending of sorrow. And there must be total emptiness, and only that otherness, the timeless, comes. So we.
Otherness
It's
is
the last slide. So this is the quote. So thought shattering itself against its own nothingness is the explosion of meditation. So there's the end of the